Neji Hyuga is a character whose development we've been following through the entirety of the Naruto series. His life, his death, and the choices he made, as well as the views he had, have been cause for a lot of politics within the Naruto universe and without. I, for one, recall the first time I ever heard about the treatment of the secondary branch by the main branch and had hoped Neji would just pull an Itachi on the whole clan. And you know, maybe that would be the perfect plot for another What If. I'll put a pin in that for now. But anyway, Neji's life culminated in the same way his father's did. To have been a slave for so long, he finally had one moment of freedom and choice, and that freedom centered solely around being able to choose when and where to die. It's a sad callback, and a horrible truth for those in the secondary branch. For a clan whose entire goal is to keep the secret of their techniques hidden, they are very easy to sacrifice. In fact, the Hyuga elder who practically demanded that Hizashi die for the clan was, unironically, Hizashi Hyuga's father. As well-to-do as the Hyuga are, they're heavily dysfunctional and view the secondary branch as nothing but pawns and servants, and the worst thing about it is that the secondary branch knows this and can't do a thing to stop it, as they're all branded with a mark that ensures the moment they step out of line, their brains can be melted. And if they die, it ensures that their eyes are destroyed. Does that sound bad? Does that anger you? Well, that is the entire reason why Neji was so hateful toward his clan. Not only had he witnessed his father killed by them to save Hiashi, but he also had to live in a world where he realized that his fate was not his own to decide. He eventually came to terms with that and forgave Hiashi, as well as Hinata, and his death seemed to change the way things worked, at least from what I gather. Neither of Naruto's children have that mark on their forehead, but then again, would you dare put a curse mark on the foreheads of the Hokage's children? Regardless, I wish to view a world where things are different, a world where Neji does not die. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. We've also noticed that a lot of people who watch our videos aren't actually subscribed to our channel. We get that YouTube is pretty good at recommending you what you want to watch, but if you don't want to miss a video and if you want to support the Amagi, we would really appreciate the subscription. Thanks so much. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. The battlefield was littered with bodies. Bodies of friends, of comrades, bodies of young men and women who had dreams, had desires, wanted to do things. This battlefield had become a graveyard of dreams. The loom of fate was weaving its cruel threads, snipping the loose ends and tying in other ways that they could never escape. This was the shinobi world. This is what it meant to be a shinobi, to never be afraid to sacrifice anything and everything for one's village. That is what it was to be a shinobi. And if you were one, it's what you did because you didn't have a choice. Neji had never known choice. He had never had that freedom to decide for himself what he would do. He, like his brethren in the branch clan, had been born into servitude. Some family that was. A slave to your cousins, your uncles and aunts. From age 3, before anyone could ever understand what it was to have a curse mark of the caged bird, you received it. Neji thought back to when he received his own. He was young and happy, naive and innocent. It was around the time of Hinata's birthday. It was actually at the very start of the Hyuga affair. He couldn't help but think back on it. The battlefield had that kind of profound effect on you. It could force you to relive memories from your past you had long forgotten or didn't want to remember. And that is what Neji was doing right now. The young boy was excited. It was Hinata's 3rd birthday, his little cousin. He loved her so much and was already working on a present for her. He had mostly finished it when his eyes lifted to see his father, watching from a chair and brooding nervously. Neji noticed this dark mood, and it affected him, but he didn't ask much about it. After all, he wanted to finish Hinata's gift. On the day of her birthday, he sat his present by the other presents for the girl. In comparison to the other gifts, his was small and cheap, but it was packed full of love, which he hoped translated well to her. He looked back to see his father before the elder, begging, pleading with him. He couldn't hear what he was saying, but whatever it was urgent, and the elder was disagreeing. Neji didn't even get the chance to receive any cake before he was taken by the wrist and pulled back into the house of the elder. He was brought to the main meeting hall. There he met the elder and Hiashi, the clan head. Neji seemed confused and a little nervous as to the meaning of these actions, but not entirely distressed. After all, they were family, right? Family doesn't hurt family. Maybe they were going to give him a special present. Hiyashi stood and walked over to him. "Do you know what it means to be a branch member, Neji?" The boy looked up. Branch member? What was that? Was it some strange word for a fruit? Fruits grew on branches. Without letting the confused boy posit any form of answer, Hiyashi spoke. "It means to serve your clan with all of yourself, being willing to sacrifice your body, mind, and soul in service of the main house, the clan as a whole, and to keeping the secrets of our clan out of the hands of the enemy." Neji was confused. Hiyashi continued. "A life of servitude awaits you, a master and a servant. It will forever be your job to live and die for Hinata Hyuga." Neji almost went to protest, but felt a hand pressed to his forehead. It began to burn a little. No, it began to burn a lot. It felt as if a hot iron had been pressed to his head, branding him for life. The boy cried out. Hizashi stepped in and walked to Hiyashi to stop him from doing this, reaching out for his brother's sleeve when suddenly he gripped his skull and fell to his knees. The elder had lifted 2 of his fingers and activated a Juinjutsu. Hizashi cried out in agony. Neji managed to look to his father as the pain subsided from the burning. Hiyashi looked at Neji and with a little reluctance knew he needed to test to ensure that it worked. He lifted his own fingers just to give him a taste of what awaited him should he disobey. Neji suddenly felt like someone had struck the top of his head with a sledgehammer, opening a massive hole in it and then began pouring molten lava into his brain. He screamed in pure agony. The pain he heard in his son's voice was worse than any pain Hizashi had ever felt. After a moment, the screaming stopped as both the elder and Hiyashi released their hold. Hizashi managed to catch his bearings far faster. After all, he had felt this before and had endured pain like this in the past. Neji, however, this was Neji's first step into what it meant to be a branch member. Neji sat on his knees, his eyes open, though consciousness was a question to be asked at this point. He drooled a little as his body attempted to understand this new feeling. Eventually, his eyes dulled and he began to lose balance. He fell to the side into his father's arms, and there he lay unconscious. Hizashi looked up at Hiyashi. Why? Why are you doing this to me? We're twins. I so easily could have been the older brother, and then it would be Hinata here instead of Neji. Would you have rather I did this to Hinata? The elder raised his fingers again, causing pain to Hizashi. Hiyashi merely held out his hand to stop his father. He looked to his brother and his nephew. I'm merely doing my duty, as are you, and so shall Neji. It's the way it's been for hundreds of years, and it cannot change now. Hizashi kept breathing, trying to dull the pain by forcing more oxygen to his brain. Neji was hardly conscious. Hizashi just couldn't believe it. You hate us. Hiyashi stopped before he left and looked back at his brother. You know I will always love you. He walked out of the room. Neji and his father were allowed to stay at the residence that night for observation, to ensure that the cursed mark of the caged bird properly took and to ensure that Neji now understood his position in life. But it just so happened to be that the Hidden Cloud had sent one of their men to Konoha to take Hinata under cover of night. This resulted in the death of that shinobi and the threat of war between Konoha and Kumo. It became obvious that the Hyuga would need to make a sacrifice. Hizashi was chosen and killed. Neji watched as they ended his own father's life. It was at that moment that it was revealed to him the kind of life he was living. He was a slave, a hostage. He was owned by the main branch, and that was the way things were. At any moment they could demand his death, and he could not say otherwise. He was property. He had lost his humanity and had suddenly become objectified, trained like an animal and treated worse than a dog. That was who he had just become. And they expected him to love them, to serve them, to die for them. No, he wanted rid of them. He wanted to kill them. Every time he trained Hinata, despite her own innocence, not understanding what they had done or why her cousin suddenly hated her, she would consistently find herself beaten beyond recognition, almost every day, by the vengeful and vindictive Neji, an act that would often earn Neji a punishment via curse mark. So now Neji was running through the battlefield. The Ten Tails roar echoed in the background. He saw Naruto standing there and Hinata standing before him, her arms held out wide, her legs in a strong stance. Wooden shards were fired from the Ten Tails, and they were headed straight for her. So if Neji was vengeful and vindictive, why was he rushing to save her life? Why was he rushing to die? He thought back once more, to a time he found a main house member on his hands and knees begging for forgiveness. Thinking back to a letter he was presented that changed everything. Hiyashi Hyuga, guilt eating up his soul, fell to his knees and begged for Neji to understand. The truth of that night was revealed to him. Hizashi was never commanded to die for Hiyashi. No, Hiyashi was willing to die for the clan, and Hizashi volunteered to protect him. As strained as their relationship was, a brother was still a brother. Hiyashi cried for Hizashi not to do this, but Hizashi had made up his mind. He had never had the benefit of choice in the entirety of his life, but now, facing death, Hizashi had a choice, and he chose to die for his brother. He chose to die a free man, and that's what he did. And now, Neji was rushing through the battlefield toward Hinata where he would make that same choice. He had decided it. Now it was when he died. He would die a free man. He stepped before Hinata to protect her while she protected Naruto. But as the wood pierced through bone and the sound of squishing flesh echoed through the cold night air, Neji realized he was alive. He turned around to see Hiyashi Hyuga standing there, protecting him, his entire body perforated by spikes. Hiyashi began to fall. Neji caught him, as did Hinata. Naruto saw this and was startled. He began to call for a medic, but everyone knew that even if one came, there would be no helping him. Hiyashi took a deep breath and spoke. "Neji, life has never been fair to you, and neither have I. If it had not been for my mistake, your father would still be here. In the time since his death, I've watched you grow, and I have learned so much from you." Neji hushed him, telling him to save his strength. Hiyashi shook his head, would not be silenced. "If this is the last time I get to speak to you and my daughter, then I wish to say my piece." Neji respected his desires. Hiyashi then continued. "I was never fair to you, Neji, nor to the Branch family. Your father had debated it with me for a long time. He believed that the treatment of the Branch family should be altered and mended. He believed that we should be a true family, and I had always hoped that, but I never agreed to it as I was afraid to let hundreds of years of tradition die. I didn't wish to be the one to kill a tradition. Now I see that was selfish. All I cared about was my own legacy, how I'd be viewed by others. It was a disgrace to me, and a disgrace to our entire clan. I'm truly sorry for everything I've done to you." He then turned to Hinata. "Oh, Hinata, my darling daughter, I was never fair to you either. Like Neji, I pushed all of my insecurities off upon you. I hurt you and forced you to be something you were not. And when you failed to meet my standards, despite trying your best, I disinherited you and insulted you like you were some disappointment. You weren't. I was disappointed in myself and merely looking for someone to blame. I now see that I was wrong, that the entire Hyuga clan was wrong. I just hope that in the future, you both can right our wrongs and reform the clan into something we can be proud of." Hinata gripped her father's hand, crying for him. She begged him not to go and to stay awake a little longer, to wait for the medics to arrive, but he told her it was okay and that he was at peace. With his hand, he reached up and gently stroked her cheek, and that was the last thing he did. At that moment, Hiyashi Hyuga died. The battle at this point didn't last much longer. Naruto with his six-path Sage Mode and Sasuke with his Rinnegan faced Obito and Madara, and even Kaguya practically alone. Neji, like Hinata, was locked into a world of Genjutsu, a world where Neji and his father were members of the main house, and it was Hiyashi and Hinata who were members of the branch house. In this Genjutsu world, Neji would grow up seeing the injustice that the branch house was forced to endure all the time, and constantly begged his father to end the suffering of their family members. Was the defense of the Byakugan really worth sacrificing the lives of everyone who possessed it over? One could not simply stop the Byakugan from falling into the hands of others, no matter what you did. Ao of the Hidden Mist was proof of that. Even if curse marks were applied, in times of war, it would not be impossible to believe that a Hyuga clansman father a child with a non-Hyuga member. You simply couldn't stop it, and even if you were adamant about trying, there were plenty of ways. Most Hyuga clansmen weren't against possessing a curse mark that sealed up their Byakugan upon death, or restricted removal of them during life. They do not wish to be publicly branded as slaves, or be tortured the moment they fell out of line. All it would take is a small tweaking of the caged bird seal to reach a happy compromise. All of the protection, none of the enslavement. That was the dream he was having, and by the time he realized that this was only a dream, the war was over. Kaguya had been sealed away. The return to Konoha was one of champions and victors. Parades were thrown. A time of mourning was to be appointed, but a time of celebration came first. Neji found himself sitting in his kimono and eating a popsicle on a balcony as he overlooked the parade and the fireworks before him. Hinata, also in a kimono of orange color depicting sunflowers, sat beside him. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. Neji looked over at her before returning to his popsicle as if to say he didn't really care. Of course he did, but he couldn't fall out of character now, could he? If he stopped being a basic tsundere, the viewers would stop caring for him as much. Nevertheless, Hinata continued. You saved my life, and you put yours at risk as well. Neji scoffed. It was what I was forced to do since birth. More than likely, it's just muscle memory. She nodded. My father, before he passed, said that we should attempt to change that. We should reinvent the Hyuga clan and make it a clan where it doesn't matter if you're a main house member or a branch house member. I want to do that desperately, and I believe Hanabi will want to as well. I want you to join in with us. Help us guide the clan. Neji thought about it for a moment and then nodded. Fine, I'll do so. In happiness, Hinata hugged Neji, causing him to lose the upper half of his popsicle. All right, get off. She pulled back. Now, let me enjoy this celebration in peace, please. She smiled, knowing that his prickly nature was covering for how he truly felt. She would leave him alone to enjoy his time. Naruto truly was heralded as the hero of the leaf after this. He was basically the king of the parade. Everyone wanted him on their floats. Gifted things left and right, all he really wanted to do was eat ramen at Ichiraku. All the while, Sasuke remained in the shadows. Sakura stayed by him, but Sasuke didn't really seem like he was in the mood to join in on the festivities. Partly because if he had his way, there would have been no festivities, only a reformation. Probably not in a positive manner now that he thought about it. The 5 great nations were at peace, and all over celebrated in their own way. But of course, these celebrations could not last forever, and eventually Kakashi, the 6th Hokage, ordered a time of mourning for the dead, which took some time. Monuments were erected, names were engraved on plaques, and various ways of honoring the heroes who had passed were being observed. One of these ways was to discuss the movement of the Hyuga clan, to which Hiyashi's last will and testament was read. It wasn't a very long will. Hiyashi was a very simple man with very few possessions. Those he had, however, were evenly divided amongst his daughters. But what came next was important as it would determine the fate of the Hyuga clan. Originally, it was planned for a time that the head of the main house would be Hanabi. Despite being younger than Hinata, Hanabi was chosen because she possessed the traits of a leader required to be a leader. Hinata did not. She was too kind and soft-spoken. That was at least what everyone was expecting to hear. But as the will was read out, shock and silence fell over the group. I, Hiyashi Hyuga, do hereby select Neji Hyuga to be my heir. The elder sat down in his seat, trying to process this, his eyes once more going over the letter to ensure that he actually read it correctly. Hundreds of years of tradition will be thrown away in a single generation. Neji was stunned. How could he, a branch house member, be selected as head of the main house? As per the request of Hiyashi Hyuga, a letter bearing his mark was presented to Neji. He opened the letter and read it. Dear Neji, I assume you're surprised to see your new position. Before you ask if this is real, I must promise you it is. Originally, my daughter, Hanabi, was to inherit the position as clan head, but I felt it important to give the title to you. My brother was right all of those years ago. We were twins. Had he emerged from the womb even a moment earlier, he would have been the main branch's clan head, as would you. I feel it is time for the Hyuga clan to change. And to do that, I believe we need the perspective of a man who has seen what it's like to be in the branch house. You may think this will be contested, but I highly doubt either of my children will disagree with this decision. Please, build a Hyuga clan that we can be proud of, with trust and joy and peace and love. Hiyashi Hyuga. Neji was stunned. He looked to the elder, who let out a sigh and pinched his tear ducts. He could not go against the will of his son. Hiyashi was officially the clan head, and if this was his last decree, it had to be respected. That being said, it was unlikely that Hinata and Hanabi's beliefs would vary from Neji's at this moment. The old man sat there and looked up and out the window at the moon. Tradition was like anything else that was a living, breathing thing. It had a time to die. And no matter how much the elder disagreed with that, he had no support from anyone within the main family to enforce it with, and should he attempt to enforce it now, the clan would be torn apart and cease to exist. Whether or not he liked it, Neji was now the head of the Hyuga clan, and as such, his word became law, whatever it may be. The elder looked to Neji. What are your orders, clan head? Neji smiled. We abolish the servantry system. The elder Hyuga took a deep breath and sighed. He was already ending everything without so much as a search for advice, but what choice did he have? And so, from there, any Hyuga in the branch house were immediately freed from their servitude. Sadly, the seals placed on their foreheads would forever remain until their death, but Neji vowed that at no time would the seal ever be used to rob them of their freedom. However, he did caution them that this was not the end of their seals. Instead, to appease the older generation, he instituted a new seal, one that every member of the Hyuga, regardless of which house they belonged to, must agree to upon birth. He commissioned a new Juinjutsu to be crafted, one that took inspiration from the curse mark of the caged bird, as well as from the reverse tetragram seal. This seal would cut out the control mechanism, but would serve the same purpose to ensure that the Byakugan could never be removed from a Hyuga, whether they were living or dead. This was to protect their clan's prized jutsu from theft, and would also serve as deterrent so that their clan would never be hunted for their dojutsu, as doing so would be unprofitable. And in sealing even the main branch, this ensured that the same events that led up to the Hyuga affair would never be repeated. This compromise was enough to appease the elders as well as the newest generation. The defense of their clan would be increased, while freedom to decide their own fate would be granted to any Hyuga. This led to Neji becoming a fairly popular clan head over the years. His level-headedness, as well as his intelligence, wisdom, and prodigious nature led to him becoming venerated as the best thing that happened to the Hyuga since Konoha's foundation. Eventually, he would enter a deeper relationship with Tenten, his old teammate. And before you call me out on this, Tenten's marriage to Rock Lee is headcanon, and we don't know who Metal Lee's mother really is. As time passes, however, a new threat, hidden from the earth until this point, arrives. Neji receives a certain letter from a certain man known as Toneri. The elder explains to him who Toneri is to the clan. Neji reads the letter and finds it to be a demand that Hinata Hyuga be delivered to him to be his wife. Neji crumples the paper and tosses it into the trash can with a laugh. The elder asks Neji what he's doing. Neji turns back and speaks plainly. Hinata is already in love, if you haven't noticed. The elder steps forward and puts his hand on Neji's arm. You think she is unwilling to make this sacrifice for her clan? Neji pulls his arm away. No, she is definitely willing to make that sacrifice, which is why I won't allow her to. She has her eyes set on someone else. This Toneri Otsutsuki, he can go back to wherever he came from. And if he tries something, we'll deal with it. After all, we've already killed one Otsutsuki, we can kill another. Neji begins to walk away. The elder calls out after him. You don't know what you're saying. Neji looks back for a moment. No, I do. And thus, he went to bed. One particular night, however, as he slept, there was a cry. Neji was out of bed as quickly as his feet would allow. Rushing through the house, he witnessed a grouping of puppets taking Hinata and Hanabi by force. Neji rushed over and began to strike the puppets. They were easy to destroy, but keeping them down was another matter, especially when there were so many of them. It was then that a knee struck Neji in the side of his head and knocked him through the paper walls of their home into a new room. He opened his eyes to see Toneri standing there, stepping in. This is all your fault, clan head. The statement of Neji's title almost felt like a spit in his face, full of venom and contempt. Toneri knelt down in front of Neji. You should not have denied me my wife. Now I will deny you everything. And in the next moment, Toneri and his puppets were gone, as were Hinata and Hanabi. Neji stood and rushed through the house, searching for any clue as to their whereabouts, but he came up with nothing. The elder approached. I warned you. Now everything will end. Neji looked back in confusion and terror. The elder hadn't lied. They kept their eyes to the skies, to the moon, which now was growing closer and larger. The gravity between the two celestial bodies was causing the moon to slowly break up. A virtual 5 Kage summit was called to decide what to do about this new threat, and Neji came up in the conversation. He'd been invited by Kakashi to explain to the other Kage just how dire the situation had become. It seems that, somehow, Toneri plans to bring the moon down on top of us. The other Kage listened carefully as Neji explained. We won't allow this to happen, the Raikage stated. We have a solution. A chakra cannon so large that it'll blow the moon clear out of the sky. The other Kage were angry at the Raikage, though, for continuing to build a weapon of mass destruction. The Raikage admitted to their fears, but he further told them that right now they should just be grateful that they had it. However, Neji begged them to reconsider using it. They were confused by this. Neji spoke. Without the moon, the Earth's ecological system will be thrown out of balance. Tides, temperatures, everything. Coastal areas will be flooded. At worst, the Earth may be even knocked off its axis. Without the moon, our world could very well end. The Raikage would fire back at Neji. If we do nothing, our world ends anyway. Besides, we have Naruto and Sasuke, and reports show that they can make another moon. Neji shook his head. That's not feasible. From what Naruto told me, it was a one-time thing. Without the direct aid of the Sage of Six Paths, we cannot hope to recreate the moon. The Raikage nodded in understanding, but held firm in his beliefs. Even so, it's better to take that chance than to be crushed by our moon. Neji shook his head. He went down on his hands and knees. Please, I beg you, please at least give us some time. He looked up. We have people on the moon. Hinata and Hanabi, my cousins who I was sworn to protect. They're up there, taken hostage. Please, let us send someone up there to save them before we destroy it. The Raikage thought about it. Mei Terumi would chime in. I say we give them time. Gaara and Onoki would second that. Kakashi would also agree with Neji and beg the Raikage to come to a compromise. The Raikage agreed to hold off, but only for so long. He showed them the data his nation had gathered for when the moon would reach the point of no return. Mark that on your clocks. That's all the time you're getting. If you don't rescue your people before then, we will disregard their presence and annihilate the entire celestial body and those thereon. Neji agreed to this, once more falling to his hands and knees in thanks. Once the meeting was over, Kakashi would lift him up. You're lucky we got the others to agree. We have no time left to dawdle. We need to put together a rescue mission. Can I leave it to you to choose the team? Neji nodded. I have some shinobi in mind. Neji would enter Ichiraku Ramen. He would sit down. There he found Naruto and Sakura. Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice, Neji said in his naturally soft-spoken voice. I need your help, Naruto. The blonde hero of the leaf looked at him as he soaked in his ramen. With what? He asked through a mouthful of noodles. Neji began to explain what happened with Hinata, Toneri, and what was going on with the moon. He showed them the timer he'd been given and told them that this was how long they had to save Hinata before they destroyed the moon. Since we're dealing with an Otsutsuki, like we did with Kaguya, I thought it prudent to involve both you and Sakura, since you have experience facing them. I also want to recruit Sasuke if possible. Naruto and Sakura looked to each other. Sakura spoke. We haven't seen Sasuke in months. He left the village to serve it in a better, more proper way, to atone for his past. We don't know where he is or how to get a hold of him. Neji cursed under his breath. Well, that's fine, so long as I have you and Naruto. Naruto then spoke. Who else is on the team? Neji held up his hand to deny a bowl of ramen kindly from Teuchi. So far, it's you two, me, Rock Lee, and Shikamaru. Gaara decided to send Kankuro as well since we're dealing with puppet soldiers. His expertise will be needed. When do we leave? Sakura asked. As soon as Kankuro arrives, which should only be in a few hours. Can you guys help? Will you make it? Naruto nodded. Doesn't seem like we have much of a choice. You can count on me. Sakura nodded. Neji then stood. I'll meet you at the mouth of the cave this afternoon. We've detected a rift there that will take us to the moon. Naruto and Sakura nodded. All three stood, and Naruto paid for their meal with his free for life coupon, which he was using a bit more than he should be. They all left. Some hours later, they met at the mouth of the cave. The rest of the team assembled. Neji, without a word, led them in. They found themselves falling and would be caught in a genjutsu. Thankfully, Sakura was there to dispel it. The team made their way deeper into the moon, where they found remnants of an old civilization. Neji examined it, as did Shikamaru. However, despite the interesting nature of this, and what Neji could only assume to be the history of the Otsutsuki clan, they didn't have time to take it in. And so they began to move their way deeper into the moon, where they would come across a mansion. It was guarded by puppets. This is where Kankuro came in. He recognized these puppets as full automatons, which was a dangerous type of puppet. However, he knew that if he could get his hands on one or two, he could likely help them sneak in. Having taken cover, they waited for two automatons to go on patrol and get far enough away. They would attack the two automatons and disable them. Shikamaru would place a tag on each of the puppets, which Kankuro could use for two purposes. The first purpose of the tag was to allow him to remotely transmit his chakra and control the puppets from a distance. Once they were inside, he would activate the second function, which was to summon the entire team to their location. Having bypassed security, they made their way deeper. They heard a voice speak. My head is killing me. I wish to stay longer with you, my sweet, but I need to rest. The team hid as a set of feet came walking down the stairs. Taking a peek, they saw Toneri moving to his bedchambers. Oh, how lucky this was. While he was sleeping, they could rescue Hinata and Hanabi. Neji began to make his way up the stairs with the others where they found Hinata. He called out to her silently. She saw him and suppressed every urge to scream with excitement. She walked over. Neji, you found me. He nodded. I did. Now let's collect Hanabi and escape. They would sneak to Hanabi's room. There they found her in perfect health. Toneri was very upset, Hinata said. He had hoped to claim her Byakugan, stating that they're pure, but he could not remove them due to the seal. Neji smiled. What he had done truly had become a blessing in disguise. Since Hanabi had been the first one to test this new Juinjutsu, that meant that nobody could circumvent the seal or take her Byakugan from her. Unknown to Neji, however, was that this meant that Toneri could not make use of the Tenseigan because he could not access her stolen dojutsu. This left Toneri very weak. However, Hinata spoke and told him the truth about what was causing the moon to crash into the earth, which was the Tenseigan vessel. She had learned its location and told them where to go. So with Hinata and Hanabi in tow, they began to make their way to the temple. Once inside, she explained that only descendants of Hamada could touch it, but that she didn't have the strength to break it herself, so Neji would aid her. "Close your eyes and take a deep breath," he told her. She did so. "Now that we're calm, open your eyes and look for the imperfections in the vessel. Do you see them?" She nodded. Neji then spoke. "Now, with all of your chakra, strike out at them." Together, they utilized the 8 trigram 64 palms, striking into the vase, eventually shattering it. To their horror, the vase contained hundreds and hundreds of Byakugan. Neji was surprised. Was this the power of the Tenseigan? He looked to Hinata and Hanabi. "We must destroy it. We cannot let him recreate this." And so, making use of fire-style jutsu, he burned away and destroyed all of the Byakugan. The mission complete, they could then leave the moon and explain what happened to Kakashi. They managed to sneak out without awakening Toneri and return to Konoha. He informed Kakashi that it was a success and that they even managed to stop the moon from falling. Kakashi and the Konoha scientists would observe the moon and find that it was slowly receding back to its original point. With the crisis averted, they would then leave to deal with Toneri, who wasn't much of a threat to them without the Tenseigan. Capturing them and looking through the ruins, they managed to discover the history of the Otsutsuki clan on the moon, and through this discovery, they managed to convince Toneri of what was Hamada's will. And so he decided to return to the moon, where he would remain as a sentry to the earth and its people. Peace returned, and during this peace, love blossoms forth. Naruto and Hinata would marry and give birth to 2 children, Boruto and Himawari. Sasuke and Sakura would marry and give birth to a daughter they named Sarada, and Neji himself would marry Tenten and give birth to their own son, a boy they named Kugi. Neji would hold his son and rock him to sleep, knowing that his son will have all of the opportunities in the world to do and be whatever he wants, a freedom Neji had come to have himself. And that seems like a fair place to call it quits. Did you enjoy the story? I know I did. I always had a thing against the Hyuga clan for its treatment of its branch members. I understand why Konoha didn't step in, because the clans within truly are the backbone of society, and it's no secret that the loss of the Uchiha had an impact on Konoha's ability to protect itself. I almost feel like if the Uchiha had survived, Naruto's story would have been vastly different, and I suppose the same would be true of the Hyuga, but it doesn't make me like it any better. I'm glad we got to explore a world where the Hyuga's grip was loosened and Neji got everything he deserved. Anyway, what did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, peace.
Did you enjoy our video? Well then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.